Okay, folks, it's 7:30, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Vivian New, the president of the California Native Plant Society Santa Clara Valley chapter, and I'm happy to have all of you joining us tonight for a talk by Helen Popper. We have these talks almost every Wednesday, and what just happened there? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong. All right, there we go. And when we have these talks, we do it with a team. But before that, I just wanted to start by acknowledging that the work that we do as the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society, we lie in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Ama Mutsun tribal band, the Tamian Nation, and the Ramaytush Ohlone. This is land that was theirs for thousands of years and was taken forcibly from them. 2 centuries of oppression and genocide. Despite that, they still live here and they thrive in this area today. We acknowledge and respect them for their land stewardship, their culture, their language, and their humanity. Our chapter hopes to learn from them, and we support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from the historical trauma. And now when we give these talks, it's not just me and the speaker. We actually have a team. And tonight our team is Penny, who will be acting as our QA moderator. We have Barbara, who's going to be watching YouTube and making sure that all the questions from YouTube are brought over here to Zoom. And behind the scenes, we have Madeline Morrow, who is taking care of all the technology for us tonight. And if you are not currently a CNPS member or you're not familiar with CNPS, we are a nonprofit environmental organization. We were founded in 1965. We have over 10,000 members with 35 chapters spread across the state and beyond the borders of the state and even into another country, Mexico, because we also have a Baja California chapter. Our chapter comprises all of Santa Clara County, southern San Mateo, and southern San Mateo County. And what we do, both the state organization and our chapter, is we work to save California's native plants and their habitat, and we do that through science, education, conservation, and gardening. If you are not currently a member, we would absolutely love to have you join us. You get a lot of nice benefits when you do that. You get 2 magazines, Flora, and this actually, I forgot to update it, and Artemisia, our scientific journal. You'll also receive our chapter newsletter, which tells you about all of our events, as well as has interesting articles. And you get discounts at various nurseries. So if that sounds interesting and you are not currently a member, all you have to do is go to cnps.org/join, and you can sign up online. Oops, this is wrong. I have not updated this correctly, so I apologize. We have a number of other events coming up, and let me see if I can find them. I may not have them here. I'm so sorry. We have a great talk next week, a scientific talk on Spartina, which is going to be done by some folks from Cal IPC, the Invasive Plant Council, and that's going to be on the preservation of the bay. Some really important work that they're doing. The week after that, we have another scientific talk coming up, and I am unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to go to cnps-scv.org, and on our website, there's a page about this series, which is the Native Plant Lecture Series, and we have all of our talks listed there. All right, whoops. And if you want to get a weekly reminder about the upcoming events, all you have to do if you're not currently subscribed is join our chapter news email list. And you can do that by sending email to this address that shows up here on the screen. You can also just go to our chapter website, and there's this information is right there, so you don't have to scribble it down right now. So just go to cnps-scv.org. You can also find our events on Facebook and Meetup. And our chapter is primarily supported financially by sales from our chapter nursery. During the summer, we are not open for pickups, but if you have something large that you're doing, like a lawn conversion, we are still open for orders up to $250 and above, and we will deliver to you if you live on the peninsula down through San Jose. And you can still shop at cnps-scv.org/cnps-scv-nursery. You can also simply go to our chapter website, which is cnps-scv.org, and there's a link to the nursery right there at the opening page. We also have a list of other native plant nurseries on the website. It's on the menu, the gardening menu, and under the gardening resources area. So if you don't find what you need in our nursery, there's a ton of other nurseries there. They're open, and so please go shop there. We love to have people buy native plants. If you are enjoying our talks and you like helping out with Zoom, we can use help. So if you are interested in joining us, we have openings for both QA moderators and a YouTube moderator. All you have to be able to do is type on a keyboard, switch windows, copy and paste, and that's pretty much it. We'll train you on everything else. So if that sounds like something you would like to do, please send Madeline a message. Her email is there, but you can also find it on our website under the Help Wanted page, which you will see right there at the front of cnps-scv.org. And so now a little bit of housekeeping before Helen starts her talk. I'd like to make sure everybody has their microphones muted. You can feel free to ask questions at any point in time by typing them into the chat box. So don't unmute to talk, just type them into the chat, and we have our QA moderator who will be reading Helen all the questions at the end of her talk. We do expect to finish by 9 o'clock. This talk is being simulcast on YouTube, and you will be able to see it there pretty much immediately. So don't worry if you didn't catch something. You can always go back and watch it on YouTube at any point in time. And if you like it, you can tell your friends about it, and they can go to YouTube and see it. And before I introduce Helen, I just wanted to ask if anybody is new to our talks. If you are, welcome. And we would love to find out how you found out about us. So if you don't mind putting a note in chat, doesn't matter if you're on YouTube or on Zoom, we'll see them both. Just let us know how you heard about us, and welcome everybody who has been here before, but especially warm welcome to those of you who are new to our talk series. And now I wanted to introduce Helen Popper. She is a longtime chapter member. She's written this absolutely wonderful book. Everybody, in my opinion, should have this book. It is just the greatest thing. If you are a reader of Sunset Magazine from way back, you might remember that Sunset used to have a thing where once a month they'd give you hints on gardening. Helen's book does that, except for native plants. It is just the perfect thing each month. I know, especially when I was first getting started, I used to pull out Helen's book and look and say, okay, this is what I need to do in my garden this month. And there's a great story behind this. So Helen, as I mentioned, is a longtime chapter member. She is one of the people back when Gardening with Natives used to meet in person as a group, and they would talk about, important things about native plant gardens, share tips, share plants. And Helen kept track of things. And when it moved online, she kept track of things. And then she pulled it all into a book so that those of us who showed up later and didn't get the benefit of all that wonderful camaraderie and information can look at her book. And I am so thankful for Helen. I've heard her talk in person at one of our Gardening with Natives gardens, and I am just delighted to have her here tonight to talk with everybody. So Helen, I'm going to turn it over to you, and to allow you to share your screen, I am going to make you the host now. Okay, Helen, I believe you should be able to share your slides now. And don't forget to unmute.
All right, can you guys all see my slides now?
Looks good.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for sharing all of that about CNPS, Vivian, and for talking a little bit. I should say I see a couple of people, Jean Struthers and one or two others that are here that know a lot more about gardening than I do, and that were around that single table we used to sit around in the old days. There were so few of us, and it's so long ago that we actually collected money each year for the stamps so that we could take our newsletter and mail it in the snail mail. That's how long ago this is from. And then there were lots of other people, Stephanie Morris and others, who did a lot of the collecting of the information, Wendy Winkler and just loads of people. I just happened to step up and say, oh, I can take all these notes right now and write them all up on the computer. And then I procrastinated for so long that I felt like I had to do maybe a better job. And that's how the book came about. So this is really, my name's on the title, but it's just my words. All the content really comes from other CNPS experts and gardeners, just like all of us. So it's really a pleasure to be here among you guys amongst CNPS again, and with other people whose names I recognize on the participant list. So not all of you were around way back when. Some of you get your inspiration for gardening from the walks that you take in all around our state and near wherever you live. Some of you get the inspiration from wanting to use water wisely and our resources wisely. But many of you want to take what you see outside and put it in your garden. And this is Renata Kemp's beautiful front garden. She's one of the people that Vivian mentioned that had her garden on display in the Springs Native Plant Garden Tour that our chapter does, and many other chapters too. And then we want to look at it more closely and have things to hold in our hand. And all of these things make us want to make the beauty of California our very own. Now, I'm supposed to talk about maintaining what we do month by month. And the first thing I should say, some of you know this, some of you don't. California native gardens, they can be maintenance-free gardens, but then they're going to look like maintenance-free gardens. So they're not no-maintenance gardens. They can be low-maintenance gardens. They can be high-maintenance gardens. But to have it like a garden that many people want, you have to do many of the things, maybe less than in other gardens, but you have to weed. You're going to have to water or time things right with the rain. You're going to have to plant. There are going to be pests. You may want to mulch, and you may want to trim things. And I think it's nice that we talked about the Ohlone. There's a beautiful book by Kat Anderson that talks about how the Native Americans a long time ago, how they were able to care for plants, and they actually did. And Mother Nature also trims, right? Mother Nature trims with fire and with wind knocking down branches. And maybe in our garden, we want to trim on our own a little bit differently. So native gardens can be much less work than non-native gardens and take much fewer resources. But to have it look like a maintained garden, that's going to take some maintenance. And that's going to be the same weed, water, plant, pest, mulch, and trim of any other garden, just, a little bit different. So what's different? Well, the book that I wrote was based it's month to month because we met every month. But there's this other book called The Gardener's Year by Carl Chapek. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book that has these lovely sketched illustrations. And after you've read this book, you might ask yourself, well, why would, and it's such a great book. It's in the libraries everywhere. You might ask yourself, well, why would anyone write a book about a year in the garden after Chapek already wrote this fantastic book? And here's I'm going to give you the answer. Okay, actually, I should caution you, I'm going to have some graphs, and I'm even going to have an equation. So I wrote this book because I was a member of the gardening group, but I'm not a professional horticulturist. I'm an economist. So we're going to have a couple of graphs, and we're going to have an equation. So here come the graphs. So here's the first graph. This is a graph of temperature and precipitation in a little town where my father grew up. He's Czech, and Carl Chapek was also Czech. And this is the temperature and precipitation. What you can see there is it's this oddly, I'm starting the year here in November, December, January, and I'm moving from there and ending in October. And you'll see why in a little bit, and some of you already suspect and know why. But what you'll see is, okay, the maximum temperature in Klatovy in winter hovers just above 32 as a maximum, and then it gets warmer, and it's typically doesn't get hotter than 70 for average maximum temperature in the months. Right? And then, but what happens to the precipitation? In the winter, there's not much rain or snow, but in the summer, that's when you get some moisture. And that's typical of much of the world. That's much of the East Coast looks like this. Much of Europe looks like this. Lovely English gardens get rain when it's warm, rain in summer months. But what about, that's Chapek's world. Well, what about our world? So here's Los Altos Hills, right? Big piece of some of the people that are in the R chapter of Native Plant Society. And what do we have here? Well, we have our temperatures dip in winter in January, February, December. And we have them go up, maximum temperatures of 100 in the summer. But look at our rain, right? Nearly all of our rain, all of our precipitation occurs when it's cold. And then where are we now? Looking outside our windows at dry weather. We get very, very little precipitation when it's hot. And that's not just Los Altos Hills. This is the entire state. You can go all the way up. I think of this as John Muir's world. You can go all the way up to Eureka. You can go to San Diego in the bottom, and it looks the same. Sacramento in the middle of the state. Murphy's in the foothills. Moss Landing. Redding back north again. Napa, a few little wrinkles there. Someone's been drinking, I think. There's a Benicia, Los Angeles, all over California. She has this hourglass figure. Right? This is very different than the rest of the state. So why does this matter? And why am I belaboring it with all these graphs? This is the last one. I mean, they'll pop up again, but not really any different. Why am I belaboring it? I'm belaboring it because sometimes you hear people say things like, never water your oaks. Don't put water on oaks. Never water Manzanita. Right? Well, heck, January, February, for thousands of years, these plants have gotten plenty of rain. It's just that they only get it when it's cool. They don't get it when it's hot. So our plants have evolved in California with this kind of arrangement. They've evolved with plenty of water when it's cool and almost no water when it's hot. Now that's not everywhere, right? So we've got plants that grow alongside rivers, plants that get drip from the redwoods along the coast, and that sort of thing. But this is by and large the big picture of what drives our seasons in California. So when we think about when to weed, when to water, when to plant, and all the rest, we want to keep that picture in the back of our minds. So I'm going to go through the year, and I'm going to start with October. because many people think about, well, I want to plant. And right now people are thinking, I want to plant because particularly right now because of the drought. It's harder in the places where most people in California live to plant right now because small plants have only little tiny, like as small as my hand in this tiny little picture where you can see me, right? Really tiny little roots. Even gallon containers don't have very long roots. And so that means that they don't have much of the way that many of our plants, not all, but many of them have adapted to this dry summer. They haven't really had a chance to adapt yet when you're just planting very young, small plants. So if you do plant now, then you're going to have to be very, very careful about how you water. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if you start thinking about planting in fall in the shoulder season, when I say shoulder season, because it starts to get cool, we start to get a little bit of precipitation, though the rainy season does seem to be shrinking. But it gets cool enough so that if you do want to water plants, then you're not going to be running the risk of promoting a lot of fungal growth that will harm the kinds of plants that have evolved with dry summers, with dryness during the heat. So if you want to get ready, you can water if you like, and that will help things getting them prepared. You can prepare to plant, and you can plant in October. One caveat, right? In October, it's very, very dry. So for those of us who live near where deer can come down, which many of us do, you have to realize that's when the deer are really hungry, and that's when they're going to come into your gardens the most and out of the hills. And that's when they're going to be tempted by things that they otherwise aren't tempted by. So if you're going to plant in the early fall, before things have really greened up, before there's more food for deer, then you'll need to either cage your plants, protect them some way, or be careful to plant plants that are largely deer resistant. Lilies, this is a tiger lily just ready to be planted. Many of our irises are deer resistant. Ferns, many of our sages. This is one of my favorites, Hummingbird Sage. Many of our sages are really good in dry areas with a lot of sun. This one actually, our Hummingbird Sage, likes to get some shade or some moisture. You'll see it growing when this is, I believe, in a park. And you'll see it growing in like coastal regions that get a little bit of moisture. If you do water, that's when you're going to have to weed. So where our weeding is not too much of a problem in the summer when there's no water, but once you start watering or once the rains come, then weeding will have to happen. So weeding has to happen in all different settings, but I want to talk specifically for a moment about meadows. This is a beautiful photograph by one of our past chapter members, Judy Kramer. And you'll see that, this is one of the things that inspires many people to want to garden with natives, and they want to plant meadows because they see it in nature and they think, okay, well, if it grows in nature without anyone planting it and caring for it, it might grow easily in my garden. And that can be true if the soil is scrupulously prepared and if you're willing to spend a lot of time weeding. But this kind of thing, if you're starting out, you might want to start out in a very small area if you're going to start out, because these are annuals, and they're going to die back. And then if they aren't very, very thickly sown, it'll be easy for lots of weeds that are all over, non-natives to find their way in. So an easier sort of starting way to do is perhaps to start with a meadow-like native lawn and a border of some perennials, and then maybe have a smaller area that you're ready to start with it. The plants are going to die back in the summer, that you'll be happy with that, where your annuals die back, and you can have that sort of in a border. This is a garden in Berkeley. It's the Fleming Garden, and that was Fleming was one of the people who started the Berkeley chapter very, very early in the old days of the Native Plant Society. And if you ever have a chance, they also, over in the East Bay, have a wonderful garden tour in the spring. And they have a spectacular garden in that house right now. And they have a meadow that is really a Festuca rubra sort of lawn surrounded by perennials, and it's really lovely. Let me skip over that picture for the moment. This is a little piece of that lovely wildflower meadow that Judy Kramer caught. This is another of her beautiful pictures with the tidy tips and the baby blue eyes, the gold fields. And this is the kind of thing that when it's all mixed up like that, and you're sort of maybe new to gardening or new to annuals, when they're really tiny, it's very hard to tell the difference between what these look like when they're very small and what weeds look like when they're very small. So it's easier sort of to get started with some perennials, unless you're going to sow seeds thickly and watch them really carefully in an area that's a manageable size. So my first garden was in a townhouse. I just had a few square yards. That kind of stuff was, very easy to manage. So you can just have to think how much you can bite off and chew. All right, so now I'm going to get to an equation because I want to talk a little bit about, going back a bit, how to get a Festuca rubra lawn, or better yet, the lawn in the Fleming Garden, the meadow in the Fleming Garden. And one of the first things that has to happen is there has to be some water. Now, it might come from a spigot, or it doesn't have to happen this way, but one way of doing this, of establishing a lawn or even a whole bunch of perennials, will be to water and let weeds come up and then get rid of the weeds. So what you can do is one approach, there's other approaches, just completely mulching. I'll talk about them in a second. One is you can water and then you wait. How long do you wait? Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, until you get a bunch of weeds. Then you can hoe them because the soil will be soft. You can hoe your area where however much you have. And if it's a big area, then it might be that you're biting off too much, you could chew, then more than you can chew. But think about how much you can hoe. What I think of is it takes in my garden, which I'll go back to show you again. This is a corner of mine. It's actually a bit bigger than this. And it took about as long. I could go and mix a cake, put it in the oven, go out and hoe. And then when the timer went off, I was done hoeing and I could have a cake. That's how much work it was. Not that much. Some people pay a lot of money to go to a gym and do just that. So first you water, then you wait for the seeds to come up, the weeds to come up, and then you get rid of them. And then you do it again, and maybe a third time. So you're going to water, you're going to weed, you're going to water, you're going to weed, maybe 3 times, maybe only 2. And then you can plant or sow your seeds, and then you won't have such a struggle. Not that it's a terrible struggle. And if you already have a good solid garden without too many weeds, then that'll work. But if you're starting out, maybe you just moved into a house or something like that, chances are there's lots of kind of weeds there. And if you plant it and if you sow your seeds with those, after you've gotten rid of most of those weeds, then you're going to have a really easy time. And this is true even if you buy sod. So a lot of times people want to take a shortcut. They say, okay, I'm going to buy sod, I'm going to roll out the sod, and then it's going to be like a carpet and I don't have to weed. And that's not really true, because sod's great and it absolutely has its place. And there's companies like Delta Bluegrass that sell native sod, and it's really a great product. I've seen it on a lot of people's gardens. It's lovely, especially, and it's satisfying, right? But if you haven't prepared the soil, then you have to remember that sod, it's like a root-bound plant, right? Our native grasses, like they grow down. They're roots grow down into the soil. And if you get sod, you've got something that only has roots that are a couple inches long. So they've been kept that way. They're kept that way. They roll them out. And if you're really good at it, or the installer's really good at it, or you've prepared the soil really well, then those little roots grow right into the soil and establish itself very well. That said, if there are robust weeds in your soil before you roll it all out, they're going to grow right up through that sod, and you're still going to have to weed. So even if you are going to use sod, you may want to consider doing at least the water weed at least once, because it'll make it less of a problem. All right, so what else do you want to do? Oh, and then you have to water. So if you water from seed, right, when those seedlings first extend their little roots, right, the seeds are really tiny, their roots are really tiny, right, you're going to have to water more than once a day. Not very much, and you have to water with sort of a fine mist so you don't just wash all your seeds away. And then after a couple of days, you only have to, then the seedling roots get to be an inch long after a week or so, and a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and a little bit longer. And the longer they get, the less frequently you have to water, right? But you also have to keep watering deeper and deeper and deeper, so that the roots get stretched out and have to keep on reaching down deeper and deeper for the water. And then let there be more and more time in between your watering, so that the roots, so that things get dried out on top, and the roots learn they have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so after you plant, if it doesn't rain and you've planted something, then you're going to have to nurse it along. Speaking of nursing, there's one thing I should say. There are a lot of plants that you will read are deer resistant. But you have to think about, maybe you've gardened and had grown lettuce. And when the lettuce is little and nice and young, it tastes really good. But then maybe later, when it gets hot or something, suddenly the lettuce will bolt. And then if you pick the lettuce, it tastes very bitter. Well, that's what happens to a lot of plants. They're really, really yummy when they're little, and they get nasty tasting when they're older. And that's how the deer think too. So a lot of things that have big thorns, so the deer don't eat them, or all kinds of things that deer don't like. When you first get them home from the nursery, where they've been grown under a shade cloth and misted all the time, then they're like your little fancy baby lettuces. And the deer are going to just gobble them right up. So you need to make sure that your supposedly deer resistant plant is deer resistant from the get-go, not or is protected from deer in some way. All right, so then we move on to winter, when things are wet and cool. In winter, we have, you might want to cut back herbaceous perennials, right? The things that bloomed earlier. You might want to divide cool season grasses if those have gotten really big and you're able to divide them. You might, when I talk about cutting back herbaceous perennials, one thing I think about is this plant here. This is California fuchsia, or Sauschneria, or epilobium. People have different names for it. This is one of the few plants that blooms really beautifully in the fall, in the late summer and fall. But it's also a plant that benefits from being cut back. So a lot of the things that grow a lot, right, and have a lot of flowers also often need to be cut back. Not necessarily every year. It depends how fastidious a gardener you are. I typically, when we had this growing, would cut it back maybe every 2 years, something like that. And you can cut this one back quite aggressively, and it'll come back looking really beautiful. This is a picture from that Paul Furman, a good photographer, took. He also runs Bay Natives in San Francisco. It's one of those nice big nurseries where you can go visit, and he has a really good selection. I think they still have music on most Saturdays. And he has taken many pictures and used to write about this. I don't know if he still has a blog about this, but you can look on his nursery site. Here he is showing you how to divide some of our hooker fairy bells. And so you can see here's a big giant clump. He sort of detangles them carefully. They're all dried out, and then you can replant them. And this is a job to do in fall. Here's a little bit of a close-up. This is from one of my favorite blogs. In fact, I think Renata, you're on here. I thought I saw your name. This is Jackie Pascoe and Renata Kemp's blog, Town Mouse and Country Mouse. They have not been active in it lately, but it's very worthwhile going to and go look at all the old posts. It'll take you at least a year to get through them all. And in the meantime, maybe they'll decide that they have time to go back to writing in it because it's so great. And here, what's important here to see, besides knowing about this blog, which really one of the things that is they're really good about writing is about propagating. And that includes dividing. So what you'll see here, and I don't know if you can see my mouse circling around this pink part. That pink part, this is a Douglas iris. And that pink part in right around November will start to show just a little bit. And that's a sign telling you this is a good time. If you want to divide your Douglas iris, this is a good time to divide it. So you can kind of look for that little pink bit. All right, so what is this doing in here? This is a gopher. This picture is from my daughter's school project because these were pests for us. And she, people think when they look like this, like they're really cute. Well, this is, again, that same picture from our lawn. And this is what's under that lawn. This is called hardware cloth. It's not cloth. I don't know why it's called that. It's very stiff and not super easy to unroll. But if any of you have tried to protect your plants from gophers, you'll know that you can't use chicken wire. You need to use a really tough sort of cloth like that. And if you want an actual lawn and you're in a place with gophers, it's going to be really frustrating for you. There are lots of, I think in that picture I showed you of the Fleming garden, you can get away with some lumps, dirty lumps, lumps of dirt, not dirty lumps, but lumps of dirt from where the gophers go in and out of the garden. And that can look just fine in a garden. But if you're going to play croquet or mow it or have little kids running around in it, you might want to not have gopher holes. And this is a pretty foolproof way of dealing with gophers. There's lots of other ways of dealing with them. A lot of the ways people talk about that Ag Extension has done experiments and found that they're not effective, but some of them are, and this certainly is. But at our house, it goes all the way back and up that first little bit of the fence there to the bottom fence line, because the gophers will run over and get into it, get into your garden that way. So they're pretty pesky things, but this is one way of dealing with them. And I guess the reason I put it in the fall is because they really they make the most sort of headway in their own activity when the soil is soft. And I have to say, I have planted some lovely natives, just got them established. And don't know if you can see this, but look out the window and see a plant go like this, left and right and left and right. And then suddenly, boom, it disappeared. And it didn't disappear because there's a zoom, background or anything. It disappeared because it went straight down the hole, right? And so native plants are not immune to gophers. You have a native garden. If there's gophers in your garden, they're going to take the native plants too. But they will, if you water less than your neighbors, they're going to go to your neighbor's garden and steal their plants more than they will steal your plants. So the less you water, the less problem you're going to have with gophers. All right, here is, this picture's in here just to say, in winter, so we have the Zauschneria epilobium, the California fuchsia at the end of summer. This is one that is really beautiful for a long time in winter. And this is our native toyon, the Hollywood's namesake. It's not a holly, but it looked like holly. So that's what Hollywood got named after. And this is just like those grafts that I said that extend all the way from the northern tip of the state to the southern tip of the state. So does toyon. And it brings in, I've seen dozens of birds on a single toyon in my garden, and all there together at the same time. It's just a complete bird magnet. And here Jay Theskin caught another from the Shasta, I think, chapter, caught a beautiful cedar waxwing, and they're here in our area as well, devouring the berries on toyon. And no matter how many birds I've seen, there's always left berries for seedlings and for holiday decorations. All right, so where are we now? Now we get to spring. So in spring, I say water again, right? It's really hard to say that in the drought that we're having now. So I must say water you judiciously. But if you have planted in fall and you have things growing, and we have a extended period of no rain, and you have young plants that are not yet established, for the sake of the long run, you're going to have to water them in the short run, right? So you're going to have to water young plants until they get established, if we don't get enough rain to water to satisfy what the plants need. You may also want to pinch things back after they've bloomed, or select branches, like if you like the way one thing's growing. Maybe you have a toyon and you want it to grow up in a more umbrella-like way. You can go ahead and prune that, select different branches. And you can certainly plant riparian plants, right? So if you have an area, if you live in an area near a river, maybe the Russian River or something like that, or near a creek, one of our few creeks in our area, then you can sow riparian plants. Or if you have a small area that you want right in your back patio to be very lush, you can sow those kind of plants now if you're going to be willing to water them, because they won't quite get established, right? They won't have time to get established, just unless you're going to water them. What else? Weeding. So all winter, hopefully we'll get rain. When there's rain, there's weeds. And one of the best ways to not have weeds is to use a lot of mulch. But you want to think about that and leave some places, once you get things established, say under bushes and that sort of thing, where you don't have mulch, because there are a lot of beneficial insects that need to be able to get into some actual dirt. But you have to balance things out. You want to get your garden established so that you can attract all those beneficial insects. So getting it established might mean putting a bunch of mulch down to keep all the moisture that you have in there, and to keep the weeds down. And then once it's established, then under the established plants, you don't really need to use that much mulch. As long as you don't lose a leaf blower, then you won't need much mulch. So hands off those leaf blowers. All right, and here, I just want to say this is, again, another one of Judy Kramer's beautiful pictures. There are actually a lot of weeds in here. Like if you're a really picky gardener, you go, oh no, I got to get rid of that. Oh, I got to get rid of that. You don't, it's like, there's always going to be some weeds, but your garden can look beautiful. Your eye can learn to look over a few little weeds, or you can just bend down and pick them up once in a while. But I keep talking about it as if there's so much work, because I'm talking about the things that you have to do in your garden, but you don't have to do it all. You don't have to do it all at one time. A lot, it can look beautiful and even formal. If you like formal gardens, you can have beautiful formal gardens with natives, and they might have some imperfections. This is a picture taken also by Paul Furman of my garden in Mountain View, which is where I was living when I first started as part of CMPS. And this is a Calistegia. It's a California morning glory. For those of you from the East Coast or the Midwest, this is not that awful morning glory that takes over your vegetable garden like a brute. This is a lovely, well-behaved plant. That said, it's another plant like a lot of vines, and we don't have that many in California, but a lot of vines can get matted and messy in gardens, and you might want to cut them back once in a while. I had this all along. I had a very long front fence around a corner because I lived on a corner on the street. I mean, I didn't live on the street, but I lived on a corner of two streets that had a long fence going around it in downtown Mountain View. And and so what I did is I planted several of these, and then every year or two, I'd cut one of them almost all the way back to the ground. And then it would come back, and the other ones would keep the garden looking nice in the meantime. So that's that's just another way of, you have to cut stuff back or it's just going to turn into this green mound on the outside and this big thatch on the underside. But one way to do it is to just cut things back partially, or it's cut some parts of your garden, some of your plants back, and not all of your plants all at once. Right. Another, this is slightly out of order. I'm sorry that this is also something that blooms in spring. And this is, I put this in for a reason, but let me just tell you, it's Saxon Holt's photography, really beautiful. He gives classes in San Francisco from time to time at the Golden Gate Park. And this I think of as our red, white, and blue. So we have our redbud, our ceanothus, and our manzanita. And I put them in here because I kind of wanted to harken back to that discussion of the meadow and the wildflowers. A big motivator for a lot of people is to plant flowers to bring birds and butterflies. And they want to plant it in like a big flat area, like that picture of the wildflowers that were under that giant oak in the picture, maybe 5 or 10 slides back, where I talked about inspiring you to want to have a meadow. But one thing you want to think about is, if you think about that and you think about, think about putting a tablecloth down spreading a tablecloth out on the ground, how much surface area that is for the birds and the bees and the butterflies, right? And then you can also think about, take that same tablecloth and throw it over a couple of chairs. It takes up a lot less space, but it provides just as much surface area. So if you tried to take one of these shrubs or shrubby trees, or trees you might call them, and like flatten it out over the ground to provide this many flowers, it would take a big, big garden. But lots of modest-sized gardens can have these 3 trees, right? These are small trees. These are perfectly sized for many urban gardens. The redbud, the ceanothus, and the manzanita. And these two, the manzanita and the ceanothus, come in all kinds of sizes, everything from hugging the ground to lots of different size bushes and depth of color. The redbud, not so much. It's just a bushy tree or a tree-like bush. But these give you massive, massive blooms that can attract all kinds of wildlife. All right, so now we are at looking at summer, coming up to where we are now. You may want to water wisely. So this is where, if you have oaks or some of the other plants, Vermontodendron, flannel bush with its beautiful yellow flowers, that if you have plants that are used to growing in well-drained soil, like much of what our hills are, or that are just have evolved for a long time, as our oaks have, with no summer, most of our oaks with no summer water, then you may not want to water near those plants in the summer, or at least not when it's hot. Or if you feel like you need to water because you've planted things in the understory of those plants, at a minimum, let things dry out a little bit before you water again. So water once, sure, try to water not on the hottest week that's coming up, and then try to let it dry out a little bit so it's not sodden continuously. That's the kind of thing that's definitely going to give a lot of our plants problems. So water wisely. There's no one watering rule for all gardens and all plants, and we can talk about people's different experiences in the question time. But that's something to remember. Our plants, except for our riparian plants and a few of them on the coast, didn't evolve with water in the summer. What else have I got here? Oh, this is, though, now a good time to deadhead your perennials. If you need to trim your oaks, or actually your toyons, or a lot of our plants now, then this is a really good time. And one of the ways of thinking about it, especially for those of you who moved to California recently, is to think about it in contrast to the seasons in, say, Minnesota or Wisconsin. I was just hiking with a friend of mine who is only beginning to garden in California. She moved here from Wisconsin, and before that from Idaho. And their winter is what we usually think of as winter. Their winter is in, December, January, and they sit inside. Maybe they look at their bulb catalogs, and it's blanketed with snow, and their trees are bare, or many of them are bare. And that's those plants in winter in Wisconsin and other areas like that. They're dormant, right? The sap is hardly moving through many of those plants for a good long time in winter. Our plants, this is when many of them are close to dormant or quasi-dormant. Our buckeye, certainly we see, are dormant, right? This is our slow season. And so it's nice to think about that in the context of what we might do in our garden. And I'm putting this picture up here. It's another Holt picture. It's got a bare madrone in the background. It's got one of our few summer bloomers, the California Fuchsia, Zauschneria apolobium. And then it's got in here a beautifully trimmed deergrass, Muhlenbergia riggans. 1, 2, 3 very classic California plants. And this is completely dormant, right? This is our winter, if you will. This is our slow season. And if Renata will bear with me for, I've got one more picture of hers. This is the season to sit in the hammock and look at, well, let's see, look at my book or look at, let's see if you can see this. It's not appearing. It's, I'll just tell you what it is. California Native Plants for the Garden by Bornstein, Frost, and O'Brien. So just one of those books that has, it's a catalog of plants that you can look at from our native plants or see what's on plant lists. This is the time now, right now, this is the time to just hang out and be very lazy. Do nothing but daydream. Think about what you want, dream about your garden. Go out, maybe you'll hear some rustling. Go ahead, deadhead something. Maybe, I'm going to go back a bit. Maybe cut back some of the Zauschneria. Maybe it'll keep on blooming a bit more into fall if you do that. Maybe rake up a little bit if you want it to be really tidy. Maybe rake into your Muhlenbergia or some of your perennial grasses to pull out some of the older parts from from prior years. So sure, go ahead and clean up a bit. Maybe any of those branches that you're worried about falling when our big winds come in the fall, clean up a little bit, but it's not the time to get carried away. This is a slow season for California plants. And this is the time to admire it and say, this is our flavor. This is the flavor of our plants in California. You can make it lusher, greener. You can select your plants to get whatever look you want. You can use our plants to make it look like an English cottage garden or a Japanese garden. We have plants for all of that. But just remember, this is the slow season for the plants themselves. Right, I think I will end that. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them or pass them along to Vivian or Jean or Renata, and I'm not sure who else, or Madeline, and all the other experienced gardeners here. And I'm the host, so I should, so I see what's in the chat, or maybe I can make.
Yeah, we just have a couple of questions that I found so far.
Okay, great.
The first one was about Bermuda grass, how to control it. They're digging it out, watering, and remove it again, and they still see some, which I think is typical of Bermuda grass.
Yeah, that is. So, what some people do is they put down, there's a few different approaches that I've heard of people doing. So one is, and it takes a long time, they put down lots and lots of cardboard, and then they cover the cardboard with mulch, and then they wait a long time, right? And that's a start. Other people solarize. So they put, and right now is actually a good time to do this because it gets really hot and you need sun for a long time. They put plastic down and then it gets really hot from the sun and it kind of kills things down at least 12 inches. It isn't always everybody's favorite approach, but that goes a long way. And that takes, that'll take weeks and weeks. But I'm not really quite sure. Someone else might want to answer like good approaches to see what we have in the chat. Good approaches to dealing with it after you've sort of done your one big one and having it cut back. So
Well,
please feel free to jump in.
My experience is that you just have to keep, if sheet mulching slows it down. It doesn't remove it completely, but it's a lot easier. And if you can remember to weed every 2 weeks, just pull it. I mean, you're preventing it from getting any food from the leaves. And after a season of that, I mean, that's what I did in my oxalis. Oh wait, that was oxalis you do that with. Bermuda grass also does not disappear with sheet mulching. It just slows it down. So you can, since it can't spread as much, that gives you places to, you can dig it up and mulch. You just have to be persistent.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you. Some other questions?
Let's see, there was one other one, I can't find it now, but it was basically about seeding and composting or mulching. If you're going to sow seeds, do you sow the seeds after you've mulched or composted, or do you?
Okay, so you don't want to mulch on top of the seeds because the seeds are gonna, the little seeds, they need to grow up through things, and mulch is sort of there in part to suppress growth of new plant life, like that's usually weeds. So what a lot of people like to do is take some soil, whatever kind of soil that is going to be in there, and you don't necessarily want to be composting. So you'll take some soil and mix the seeds with a handful of soil, and that distributes them well. Or take a bowl and mix the seeds with some soil, depending on the kind of seeds, and then you can sow the seeds that way. In terms of preparing the soil, you can want to put some, compost amendment or something like that. But most of our plants, they're not like what you normally compost. Like normally you compost things that need a lot of nitrogen. Right, so you'll put compost in your vegetable garden and that sort of thing. But most of our plants don't use quite as much nitrogen as a lot of plants from other areas, and so they don't always need compost. Now, if you're in a new development and the soil's really been scraped and you really don't have soil, then you're gonna need something. But generally, we don't typically need to add much amendment to our soils. Anyone else want to answer? Jean Struthers, I know you know lots about this. Jean has, I think back to times where she's taken a blowtorch to Matilla poppies I think that was what it was, to get them to germinate. She really knows a lot about germination. Very quiet there, but I see her name. I'm going to unmute her just in case. Oh, can't do that anymore because I'm not the host anymore. All right, well. If you want to unmute yourself and speak up, please do.
Okay, there's another question here about temperature. Somebody from Livermore wondering about pruning chaparral natives in the summer. Is there a heat limit as far as pruning?
They are, I think that is mostly the time to prune. I mean, there are a few, that is a good time to prune. And I don't know that there's a particular heat limit to do that. It's in nature, right? How are they pruned? They're pruned by fire. So that's how chaparral plants in general are pruned, or by deer. Madeline, did you want to say something else? I see your hand up.
I just have Is it possibly because, they're worried about sparks from garden equipment?
Oh, I didn't think of that. I was only thinking of yeah, sir, that would be a problem. Yeah, I generally prune with not gas or electric equipment. Yeah, I just actually used a handsaw the other day on an oak and a toyon. Very effective, a lot faster than my husband likes to whip out that little chainsaw, and not me. That's I guess I don't use it as well, but the handsaw can get through quite a few inches actually. Yeah, no, that would be a terrible thing to do that. So thank you for mentioning that. We have to be very cautious, Madeline.
Okay. Let's see, there's just a note here from the Bornstein book you mentioned. Apparently it's out of print, but Orange County CNPS has it in stock.
Oh, great.
So if you
Great.
go
I
to
thought I saw it. I just checked on Amazon. I thought it was in there today. There's certainly some used ones
Yeah.
available on
The
Amazon.
used ones are very, very expensive. So
Yeah.
this Orange County availability is great.
Yeah, well, definitely get it there. I have to say, one thing I should mention about that is that that's published by Kachuma Press. I'm not sure how many of you know that press. It's a tiny press, but if you ever have a chance to buy a Kachuma Press book, you should. They're beautiful books, and they have about they don't have very many. They have about 10 native plant books. They have one about oaks, they have one about redwoods. They're just a lovely, lovely little press. And this is that Bornstein, Frost, and O'Brien book is a gem.
Okay, we have another question about what does it mean to water plants deeply? Doesn't that use?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Let me let you finish the question.
Yeah. Did you get that? Water
what does it mean to water deeply? Doesn't that use a lot of water? Okay, so by watering deeply, in a sense, and yes, that does use a lot of water. You don't want to water quickly, right? Because if you put a lot of water down, if you use a lot of water right away, a lot of the water will run away from wherever you want it to water. Okay, now how we water has a lot to do with what kind of soil we have. So one of the challenges of writing this book was that people have a lot of opinions about how to water, and really smart people with very different credentials had very different opinions about some of these. So it takes a little while to sort out, well, why do people think, like some people think drip is great, some people think drip is awful. Some people think you should have MP rotators, these nice little misty sprinklers. People have different opinions. It depends on how you water, depends on whether, in part, on whether you have sandy or clay soil. So if you have clay soil, then you need to water really, really slowly, because if you water really quickly, then only the top will get wet and the rest will run right off. And so watering deeply sort of can mean watering slowly if you have that kind of soil, very, very slowly. And why do I say water deeply? Well, in order to encourage, deeply might only mean an inch if you just planted a seedling. Right? If a seedling, if your plant only has roots that are a centimeter long, then if you water 2 centimeters deep, so that it's wet 2 centimeters deep, you've watered deeply. And then if you let the top dry out, and the top dries out faster than the bottom, then that means that plant is going to be reaching its roots to get a little bit deeper. And then as the plant's roots get deeper and deeper, you'll water long, but you'll water less and less frequently. Okay, so when you have a plant that only has 1-inch long roots, that top inch is going to dry out pretty fast. And watering deeply just means watering past that top inch. But by the time your plant is grown down to be 12 inches deep, you might not have to water more than once every 2 weeks. So watering deeply means the water has to get down deep into the soil, but you don't water very often. Okay, so water deep and infrequently is great, and it's a really great rule of thumb. And in the extreme, once you have a really established garden, that might mean water deeply means water in the winter and then wait, like nature does, and don't water again until October. Right? So watering deeply and having roots that are plants that are established means you can water deeply and infrequently. And that ends up, it doesn't save water when you first plant the plants, but it does save water in the long run. One other thing I should say about it is that if you are going to plant something like a meadow or a lawn or something where you're going to be using sprinklers, then you might want to consider something called MP rotators. It stands for modulated pressure. And those water very, very slowly. And sometimes people, I have heard someone say, or to a friend of mine said, oh, don't put in MP rotators. They water too slowly. But the point of MP rotators is they water very evenly, and they are capable of watering very slowly so that the water can soak in and not run off. So your plants will your plants will adapt. They will grow their roots nice and deep, and you don't have to water very often.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that completely answered, but.
So many variables, right?
Yeah.
Somebody here I've never heard of this before, but somebody used coffee sacks as a way of layering mulching to give it
okay.
Bermuda grass. Apparently, several layers of, I don't know where you get coffee sacks, but just a thought.
Well, I imagine if you have coffee sacks that they are going to degrade much like cardboard would, right? So that will serve a very similar purpose.
Right.
They can chime in on the chat if they have more to add. Oh my gosh, I just saw there's 43 messages, Madeline. I'm glad you're going through these.
Right.
Penny is reading them, but yeah.
Great. Okay.
And then somebody wants to know when do you trim the California fuchsia?
Okay. I think you can. There's trimming and then there's trimming. So if you want it to bloom again, and if you can have a small enough area of it to handle, you can just pinch it back when the blooms fade a little bit, and that'll keep it looking good for a really long time. But every once in a while, like maybe every year or two, you can trim it all the way to the ground, and I would just do it after it's done blooming. So I would think that would be typically, it starts to look really scraggly in maybe the end of November, something like that. When it starts to look really scraggly like that, that's a good time to cut back the California fuchsia. And then it'll start to grow back, in that wet period. So it's a little different. A lot of other plants you want to cut back in the real summer, but California fuchsia, it would just be a pity to cut it back in the summer because you'd miss all the blooms, and it doesn't do it any harm to be cut back after it has bloomed.
Okay. I'm just a note here. Somebody wanted to know if this is being recorded. It is available on YouTube. It'll be available a little bit after the talk is finished. And let's see. One prune Salvia mellifera. I'm not sure. And how far do you prune it down?
Oh yeah, salvias are tricky. Yeah, I have not. Again, this is. I think here, I hope someone else will jump in because I have only my own experience to go on this. So lavender, of course, is not a native, but some of you may be familiar with how tricky it can be to cut back lavender, right? They get that woody part. So if you can pinch back your salvia pretty often, then you can keep it kind of going, because you'll want to cut it back, but you'll be tempted to cut it back, but you don't want to cut it back past where there's like some green growth on it, right? So they're not like, some things you can cut to the ground, like Zauschneria or the epilobium and the California fuchsia, you can be really brutal with. And the same with Baccharis, you can be really brutal with Baccharis. But in my experience, sage, you have to be not quite as brutal with, even though you might want to, because it can start to look pretty ratty. So I think it's better to go a little bit, to make sure you just leave a little bit where there's some growth coming back on it.
I don't have experience with Salvia mellifera, but I have pruned some other sages, Leucophila, and I've cut it back about 12 inches. And I do that you got to do it sort of in midwinter because it starts putting on you want to do it before it puts on new growth. And it has responded well to pruning. So I would say if you're not sure about pruning a salvia, do what Helen suggested. Prune it back a little bit, see how it responds, and you might be able to prune it further. But I mean, if you have to prune it a lot, it's probably in the wrong place, which is really easy to do with salvias because I'm always optimistic that it won't get as big as they say, but it does.
Thank you. Now, when you said prune it back 12 inches, you mean prune it back to 12 inches?
No, I meant
Or you mean prune it back by 12 inches?
about 12 inches, 8 to 12, depending
Off.
on how
Prune that much off of it. Okay.
how much the branch looks like.
Thank
And
you.
I got really nice new growth when I did that.
Great.
Okay.
Others?
Somebody wants to know about a good book on propagating California natives.
Oh, there's
I know
Sarah Emery.
Right.
Taking it from seeds. That's the Bible.
That one is out of print, though, just so everyone knows.
It is out of print. Yeah. There's also, there are bits and pieces of it in Marjorie Schmidt's book, but it's scattered throughout the book.
I think somebody put in a number of resources in the chat where.
Yeah, I think Judy put in the two books that were just mentioned. I also put in a link to a website. It's actually the website that a lot of the native plant propagators use. So it's the NPN. Well, anyways, it's in there. I put it in both YouTube and in Zoom in the chat there.
And I just want to mention once again, if you want to, I think Madeline, I think you said you might be able to put in the Town Mouse and Country Mouse link in there. They've written a great deal, particularly Jackie Pascoe on propagation. Just lots and lots in there. It's a real treasure.
I think somebody did put that link in there.
Okay.
I just put it in again.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you do Town Mouse, if you just Google Town Mouse and Country Mouse, you're going to come up with Aesop's Fables. But if you write Town Mouse, Country Mouse, California Gardening, you'll come up with their blog.
Okay. Let's see.
There's a ton of questions. Let's see.
Right. Let's see. I'm trying to.
Here's one that was kind of early. I think it came off of YouTube. So somebody wants to know about plants that are pretty. They're also xeric, and they would act as a quasi-fire defense.
Oh.
I would say Manzanita, if you water it. That's what we learned in Manzanita and Ceanothus. If you give them reasonable amounts of water, are not fire prone. And they're pretty. They look good all year.
The thing to know about those is that they, right, I mean, that maybe the person who wrote that question can say what they're looking for in terms of height, right? Because for fire, one of the important things is to avoid a fire ladder. So if you have something low growing, right, and then you have a big gap and you have something big. So let's say you have low growing Deadhead or something like that, which has keeps a good amount of moisture in it, which is a succulent. And some people plant it thinking that it's like a real desert plant. It's not really. You'll see it in sort of crevices when you go hiking. It's usually a little protected, but it does keep a lot of moisture. And if you plant a lot of Deadhead low, and then you have a big gap, right? Or you plant a low growing Manzanita or a low growing Ceanothus, right? And then you don't have like those intermediary bushes that make a fire ladder that go up to your bigger trees, then you'll be in a lot better shape. So one of the things to make sure to avoid is a fire ladder. And then the other thing to avoid is having dead parts of your plants, right? So it means if whatever you plant, you need to kind of have to prune out whenever it has some dead branches, which, just are an inevitable part of plant growth.
I just put a link. I put the name in the chat of a talk we had a few weeks ago that's on our YouTube channel, Fire Resilient Landscaping with Native Plants. It's a talk by Nikki Hansen, and it answers an awful lot of these questions.
Yeah, are these questions going to be posted? Because I'm just noticing there's a lot of good advice on here. So Nancy Grove just wrote Rotators and put out about a half a gallon per emitter, similar to a drip. They also work under low pressure, so there's less evaporation. And someone else said that they did get the Bornstein Frost O'Brien book on Amazon. That was really nice. Very happily, that Kachima Press book. Yeah, anyway, I think there's also probably lots of good advice in the chat as well as questions.
So everyone at the end of the talk, those 3 dots at the bottom under the chat let you save the chat, and it's saved to your own computer. So that's a really great way to get all this advice. You can pull it out at your leisure.
Okay. One other thing I see on here from Barbara Hunt to everyone, from Carrie Olson, sorry. What is your preference in terms of a container size when you're buying native plants? I love this question because I have 2 different preferences for different things. I really like, I hate digging a bunch of big holes. So I really like small plants, but I'm not that careful of a waterer. So if it's close to my house or close to the hose, I'm going to go for the smallest plant I can buy. Okay. And that's often like a little 2-inch, sometimes they're called rose pots. So they're 2 inches square when you look at them, but they go long, they go fairly deep. They're not really pots. They just call them rose pots. So they're like these little, little plastic things, 2-inch, like a 2-inch pot that you normally get, but then they have long roots. But I'm also delighted with 2 inches. And then sometimes I really love flats because you get a lot of plants in a flat, but then you have to take your time and sort of separate them out and decide where you're going to put them. That said, if it's further from the house and it's harder to water, I'm definitely going to go for the 1 gallons, right? Because those are better established plants. And you want to make sure you don't want to get, like, if you're a cheapskate like I am, you might be tempted to get the biggest plant in the smallest pot. And you don't want to do that because it's going to have roots that are, they've been cramped up, like just and misshapen, and it's not going to transplant really well. So go for a modest sized plant in a modest sized pot. And if it's a little 2 inches, it doesn't matter because you're just going to be fussing with them anyway. But for 1 gallons are really good if you're not going to be that attentive, right? Really nursing them along with the water. So I think for most people, 1 gallons are the best. And that's why I think a lot of people who install plants for others use 1 gallons because they're more reliable. But if you're doing the installing yourself and you're going to be near a water source, then 2-inch pots, I think, are great. But this is, people have a lot of different opinions about that.
There's a question or a statement here from YouTube. Have you ever watered a plant with a gallon or half-gallon milk jug with a pinhole in it? It's something I do all the time.
Well, maybe why don't you talk about that then? Because I have not done that.
Well, you just I put 1 or 2 pinholes in, and you just fill up the jug and you put it, in the root zone where you want it around a plant. And if it's a plant that's been established for a while, I may put 2 or 3 around, and they just drain in an hour or less. And so it's just I have a big yard, and so rather than watering everything, I just do this for newly establishing plants for the first year or 2, 2 or 3 actually.
That's great. That's really great.
Well, I mean, you're running around for a while, filling up water, water jugs, but it's very, very effective.
Okay. Penny, also, I noticed that there were several questions about desert gardening. I don't know that any of us are necessarily that experienced with it. And I put a link in the chat to the Riverside San Bernardino chapter of CNPS. And those folks would have a lot more experience with gardening in the desert because that's where they live.
Right. Yeah. I saw that one. I missed it. Right.
That's great. And I just see in the chat, and thank you, Vivian, Amazon has the Emery book. Unbelievable. You guys, that is really, I've been looking for that for years for gifts for people. That's a great little book.
Yes.
Looks like it's back in stock. Fantastic.
Okay. So there are a lot of interesting questions and information. So please be sure and save this at the end of the session, because there are a lot of
Yeah, other people making comments. For those of you interested in salvias, about their experience with different salvias, fantastic.
right.
So I think, are we quieting down, or?
So unless there's more from YouTube, Barbara.
Well, there were some questions about that Muhlenbergia that looked very spiky, and most people say they're Muhlenbergia's arch, and I'm thinking that was either a new one or somebody, you can cut them to the ground every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one that had been cut to the ground, and then and made spherical like that, right? So yeah, no, those can be very aggressively pruned. They can be, you can rake them out and they'll get that loose look, or you can really cut them down to the mounds. A lot of our bunch grasses are like that. You can cut them down to a little mound and they grow back beautifully. Really, they look so lovely like that one. Yeah,
since you can't put your grass on fire by cutting them back, you're imitating fire.
Exactly. I'd say, yeah, Muhlenbergia. I guess it depends what you want, but I think it's nice to cut it back. Yeah, I don't know. Who has an opinion about the best time to cut down the Muhlenbergia? I can speak to some of the other smaller bunch grasses. A lot of our smaller bunch grasses do well being cut back in fall, and then you get, or even in winter, and then when they're still going to get some green growth on them. But I'm not 100% sure about the
I've done it from time to time, and I agree. I think late fall, winter is the best time because they start their growth reasonably early in spring. You want to cut them before, and it takes a lot of oomph to cut. It's not an easy task cutting a large clump of Muhlenbergia to the ground, but it's amazing what it looks like. I mean to the ground, like, about 3 to 5 inches. And I don't have power tools. I use big I have some really sharp head shears. It's quite a workout, but
someone else is asking about best source for edible native plants. There are some UC Press books on edible native plants. There's also Lowry Middlebrook has a foundation in San Jose that has been experimenting a bit with edible native plants. And so that's another resource to go to. I can't remember the exact initials. It's like
California.
Almost. Someone, go ahead.
I think it's California Native Garden Foundation.
That's it. Yeah. But there have been those little handbooks. UC Press has one of the handbooks on edible native plants.
And Helen, do you see that question from Carrie McCormick?
Can you repeat it? I'm not sure.
It's during the dry season. They're I think in Livermore. They water their established natives every 3 weeks. If there's going to be a heat wave, should we water our natives ahead of the heat wave?
I guess, I think you might end up killing your plants if you wait till after the heat wave. As long as there's a chance for them to dry out between times, I think you're okay. It's probably a little better ahead of them because then the plants absorb. My understanding is that the plants take in all that water and then they're ready for the heat wave, right? So it's not a matter of making sure there's all the water in the soil. It's a matter of making sure that the plants have had a chance to uptake that water. That's my understanding. I don't have personal experience with that. And I think that's just a tough call, right? It depends. I mean, because you certainly don't want to have a sodden ground if you've got, a coast live oak or something growing. But But if you're establishing things, and you must have it must be a pretty established garden if they're in Livermore and they're only watering every 3 weeks.
Yeah, right.
So it's, I would think watering ahead of it is a really good idea. Not in the sense of leaving a muddy lawn, a muddy yard, but in the sense of making sure the plants have had a chance to take in a bunch of water, because they're going to lose a lot.
Okay. I think that's about all the questions. Oh, there's one more. Just a great presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good question. I'm really grateful to the Native Plant Society.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. That was amazing. There's so many compliments coming in, a lot of thanks, and a lot of, actually, we've had one of the best turnouts tonight that we've had for, so you're very, very popular. Anyways, if there are no other questions, maybe we can wrap up. We're getting very close to 9 o'clock.
Right, but don't forget to save the chat if you want to get some of these resources. Go click on those 3 dots, and there's even more information coming in that the Yerba Buena chapter has a talk on ethnobotanical traditions and science happening tomorrow night. So you might, if you're interested in edibles, you might wish to check out that talk.
There is something else I think I neglected to say, and I know you put it in the text, but it might be kind of buried. A lot of times people want to know where can they find plants, and I think there's 2 things to say. One, your local Native Plant Society is an awesome place. Actually, there's 3 things to say. Your local Native Plant Society is good, but their native plants are now really in the trade. And you'd be surprised when you go to just your run-of-the-mill garden center and ask them how many of them are delighted to order them for you, right? So let's, do that and make native plants be in the trade all the time. It's happening more and more, and the people that are in the profession want it to happen. So, and they don't charge you more just because they order it just for you. You just have to wait a week or 2. So there's a lot of that. And then the other thing I should mention is the Native Plant Link Exchange. And that's what I think that was put earlier in the chat. Native Plant Link Exchange. I think it's just NPLX.
It's actually CN.
Oh, thank you. California.
I just put that in the chat.
Did I get that wrong? Thank you. And that's really nice because it also has boxes where you can look up different things and look for plants that have different types of things. It's a really great resource.
And I put a link in the chat to the gardening resources page on our chapter's website. And that includes a link to a lot of the native plant nurseries on the peninsula and East Bay. Madeline's mentioned Calscape as a great resource. So calscape.org is also another great place to both learn about plants, but with every plant, there's a link to the nurseries that they know about who sell that plant. And that's similar with the California Native Plant Link Exchange that Helen just mentioned. So there's a ton of resources these days to help you find your native plants.
Perfect. Thank you. Great.
And Nalalini mentioned that she watered the buckwheat before a heat wave. It turned white and fried. It was probably too close. I know if I don't pay attention soon enough, I don't want to water too close. And
so yeah, buckwheat. Yeah, buckwheat's
cross
really
my
sensitive.
fingers and hope they make it. And at least a good thing about buckwheats is they reseed and they will probably come back.
Yeah, I have only a small patch of buckwheat. I don't water them, but we don't live in Livermore. So it's a little easier.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess good night all then, and thank you so much, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
Remember, if you have friends you want to who missed this talk, who would like it, send them to our YouTube channel. It will be there soon.
It's there now. It's not as soon. It is there at this instant. So you can get to it anytime.
we've come a long way since sitting around a little table collecting $2 for the year's worth of stamps.
We have. But Helen, thank you so much for collecting that wisdom from those early days and turning it into a book that's just a wonderful, wonderful resource. And it's exciting that it's back in print, so everyone can get it easily now.
Thank you.
I'm just going to the link to the YouTube channel is on our website, but I think we should put it in there. It's the CNPS Santa Clara Valley YouTube on our website, but I think I also put it in there. It's in the chat, the link, and you can just Google it also, but there's the link to our YouTube channel. There's lots of great talks there recorded.
Yeah, and it's linked from our website, our chapter website too. So if you go to the website, everything is available from our chapter website.
Okay, I just saw something on here. It said, I've heard Bart O'Brien say that the time to trim California fuchsia is between Christmas and Valentine's Day. And I would never want to contradict Bart O'Brien, who put a lot of input into the book. I'm just going to say, once it starts to look all scraggly, right? Once it's spent, it's not that different between November or Christmas. you can cut it back then. So I'm sure that it's going to start growing back better, right? Christmas, Valentine's Day. But once it's spent, it's spent. And if you pinch it back when it is still flowering and when the flowers sort of are dying off, then you can get extra flowers. I'm just going to say, once it starts to look all scraggly, right? Once it's spent, it's not that different between November or Christmas.
Wait, somebody.
Oh,
yeah.
we're looping. Yeah, somebody's probably got it.
Got the unused.